everyone. Welcome to this podcast hosted by the Von Hippel-Lindau Alliance. I am your current host, Jessica Asante. I am a second-year student at the MGH Institute of Health Professions in the Genetic Counseling Master's Program. And I'm joined by Elysa Bond today, who is a certified genetic counselor at Rush University Center in Chicago, Illinois. She graduated from University of Michigan's genetic counseling program, where she completed a research project that studied the dating experiences of people with von Hippel-Lindau disease. Elysa joins us today via Zoom to discuss more about this project.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me talk about this today. I'm super excited to kind of get into more detail about the research. I was really happy with what we learned. I'm happy to share it.
Yeah, I'm really interested in learning more about your level of knowledge before you started this project on VHL.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really important place to start because I do want to make very clear that I don't have VHL. So thinking about research about dating experiences of young adults with VHL. I am a young adult. I'm in my late 20s. And I've dated. I have experiences in that way, but I don't have VHL and I don't have any other cancer, tumor predisposition syndrome, or any other inherited disease. So I had kind of started this project as part of my thesis work at the University of Michigan, part of studying to become a genetic counselor. So knowing that I wanted to be able to be working in the clinical setting with individuals who have cancer predisposition syndromes like VHL, which now I'm doing. And for anyone who's not as familiar with what a genetic counselor does, I did want to make that clear too, kind of as part of a medical team, kind of a multidisciplinary team in the cancer setting. I'm talking to patients about their personal and family histories, about genetic testing, kind of what information that can provide, and more broadly about hereditary risk for cancer. Medically, of course, talking about surveillance and things like that, but also psychosocially, emotionally, kind of guiding families what has the potential to be a pretty stressful process, maybe even in the midst of a more unexpected diagnosis. So to kind of come back to your question more specifically, my experience with VHL specifically prior to starting this project was pretty limited. It was more in the sense of maybe the right word is kind of like a didactic setting in the classroom. Certainly I'm studying about these hereditary syndromes, hereditary disease, but didn't really have as much of a real world connection quite yet. And a lot of my clinical training, we're certainly exposed to these types of inherited conditions, but I think often there's a lot more focus on things like breast, ovarian, colorectal cancer. So that was kind of my starting point.
Yeah, it sounds like this project gave you the ability to give you that real personal experience of talking to people impacted by some of the conditions you've learned about. And so as you were learning in school, what kind of gave you the idea of doing a project like this?
Yeah. In my mind, one of the best parts about genetic counseling, maybe kind of compared to other health professions, is more of a focus on the lived experience of some of these conditions like VHL. So as someone who's really aspiring to be working in that way, I think I had a lot of desire to learn more about that lived experience of individuals with rare diseases, and to be able to, kind of provide other healthcare providers with this knowledge as well, as others are doing this work. I think a pretty common sentiment, one participant had said pretty specifically that in all of her interactions with her healthcare team, that there was a lot of focus on really big picture subjects, do X, Y, Z, go get your scans, maybe a little bit about the inheritance of VHL, kind of like this is what's going to happen if you want to have children. But there was never as much of a focus on, things that were a little bit more applicable to her, especially as an adolescent, navigating some of these tough issues like dating. So I think that had kind of motivated me to have this specific focus. And plus, I think it's a very understudied area in many ways. one of those things just being that VHL is more of a rare condition, even compared to other cancer predisposition syndromes. I think there needed to be more attention in this way. So all of those reasons, I think, kind of came with the conception of this project.
Yeah, I agree with you. When I was like looking into the literature to kind of see if there were similar projects, yours was the only one that really encompassed what it was like to date. And so you mentioned that partially because VHL is so rare, that's why it's never really been studied before. But also, are there any other particular reasons why this could have never been studied before, and why, things like breast cancer have been studied and disclosing a BRCA2 mutation to a partner has been studied, but nothing along the lines of von Hippel-Lindau?
Yeah, so that is very well studied. You're right. There's so much literature out there about hereditary breast and ovarian cancer syndrome, which, like you said, that's caused by the BRCA or BRCA mutations. It's an interesting thing. I mean, yes, I think part of it is just because it's a more rare condition, but I think there's also a lot of things that translate a little bit more readily when we're talking about like hereditary breast cancer, hereditary ovarian cancer. These are things that are in general more common. As a layperson, maybe someone's more familiar with the concept of breast cancer as well. But you need research about rare diseases, because we can't translate those findings from all of those studies to something that is a little bit more unique, like VHL. HBOC, the hereditary breast and ovarian cancer, often is not diagnosed until later in adulthood. VHL is a little bit more unique in that way, and we see presentation in childhood and adolescence, which is very, very different. Often before people are dating, would be a very big distinction in that way in this specific context. And it's affecting the body in very different ways too. I think a lot of the research with breast and ovarian cancer kind of has naturally focused more for individuals who were assigned female at birth, have ovaries, breast tissue. A lot of research has kind of focused on that more so. So this is very different. VHL affects many different areas of the body. And we need to know more about that and know more about, diverse people's experiences and perspectives. So I think part of it is just rarity of the condition. And I hope in part that some research, or rather the kind of the information, the knowledge that we've gained from this study could also be a little bit applicable to other tumor cancer predisposition syndromes that impact individuals at younger ages. So something like Lee-Fraumeni syndrome, as an example. I hope our knowledge continues to grow.
Yeah, it's a great point to make, that this project really is paving the way and showing that there's more conditions that can be studied, especially with how they impact younger people. And so I really enjoyed reading about this project. And I want you to kind of elaborate more on the challenges that participants described when trying to disclose their diagnosis.
Yeah, definitely. Participants had a lot to say about this. I think it's been a topic, something that people have kind of struggled with overall, is a common perception. I think there's just a lot of apprehension in disclosure in general. Like, this can feel pretty intimidating to talk about a diagnosis with a dating partner. It kind of feels like a very high stakes conversation compared to sharing other aspects of yourself, when you're kind of in the initial phases of getting to know someone. Dating is really just hard enough as it is. I think that's a pretty universal experience, that it's kind of challenging. It's a tense, difficult thing for many people across the board. But with VHL in particular, I think there were a lot of big decisions at play. When do I bring this up? Is this something that I should be talking about on the very first date, or maybe later on? Is this something that I should be like putting in my online dating profile? Or, is this something that would be really best saved for when the relationship is very serious? And also a lot of challenges just figuring out besides the timing, kind of like what information should I be sharing about this? How do I initiate these conversations? Is it going to be changing how my partner thinks about me? Is it going to be impacting the relationship too? I think it's something that can be very emotional to talk about also. It's tough to be so emotionally vulnerable, especially when talking to a brand new person. I think that could be pretty tough. And in any dating relationship, there's going to be this fear of rejection. I think that was a very common feeling from a lot of the people I talked to, that there's this fear that maybe a partner is going to react by saying, this is just too much for me to handle. I don't want to get into this, kind of viewing it as like baggage, putting that in air quotes. And some people had really difficult experiences talking to partners about this and not having the reaction that they wanted to have, unfortunately. In some cases, leading to the end of relationships or leading to a lot of hurt, kind of coming out of experiences like that, feeling really discouraged, really unlovable, unfortunately. So I think there have been a lot of challenges here, and not always necessarily an immediate breakup or something like that, but kind of a general perception that VHL might kind of have wear and tear on the relationship over time, going to medical appointments or having health problems. So there's kind of that perception as well. Another thing that came up from a few different people was that VHL can sound pretty scary, kind of relating back to what we had talked about with breast and ovarian cancer too. People have heard of that a little bit more. People are a little bit more familiar with that. So one thing that seemed a little bit unique from the literature that's already out there is that, talking about VHL for the very first time with someone who's never heard of this condition before, that's kind of a big task. Sometimes people's reaction is just, wow, this is a lot. You're telling me that like tumors can pop up in all these different places. Like, this sounds so awful. And I think that's a really tough reaction to have sometimes, to kind of talk people off the ledge, be like talking your girlfriend down a little bit. Like, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. So I think balancing all of these things can be kind of challenging, and balancing some of these tensions of, what's the right time? What's the right amount of information? So maybe I'm not getting that reaction that I don't want to have. There's a lot of these tensions at play overall, I would say.
Yeah, I definitely remember reading about someone's experience with being rejected after disclosing, and then kind of appreciating their vulnerability, but also feeling that pain through their words. And then also about the fears of VHL sounding worse than they describe it. Someone was using the term benign a lot to kind of ease the blow to their partner. And so those things are definitely important things to consider. And I really appreciate like how vulnerable all the participants were. Like, they were super honest.
Absolutely. I really can't thank all these participants enough. I talked to 26 different people who took time out of their day to be incredibly vulnerable and very open about these experiences that they've had. Sharing with someone, they've never met, someone who's kind of just coming in out of the blue. So a huge thank you to everyone who was involved in this project, definitely.
Yeah, and hearing their words or reading their words is definitely impacting me. So I can't imagine how helpful it is to someone else with VHL or someone else with like a rare disease. And so disclosing seems to be sort of a challenge. What were some strategies that helped participants?
Yeah, I mean, I guess how I would want to answer this first is that this is definitely not like a one size fits all process. Everybody is different. There's not a right or a wrong way to go about this. Absolutely not. So there were a lot of different strategies. I think figuring out the timing of the conversation, for some people, it was more of an approach of, am I in a relationship that I think has the potential to be longer term? And maybe maybe this is kind of tough to bring up very casually in the setting of a first date. Maybe I'm going to wait until we're a little bit further along and I'm a little bit more sure that this is a relationship that's going to be going somewhere. I'm not going to disclose this to like a one night stand or something I'm not serious about. I don't want to be doing that emotional work if it's not worth it, basically. I think for other people, it is kind of a piece of self-identity. So maybe it comes up a little bit more readily in that way, or, people feel a little bit differently about what the right timing of that should be. Maybe it does come up a little bit more quickly. But thinking a little bit more logistically, since you're asking about kind of strategies in disclosure, I think a lot of people kind of took the natural opportunity. If it's coming up naturally in conversation, just kind of saying, okay, great, I'm going to move forward with this. Maybe it's really difficult to hide. Maybe there are some visible signs. Maybe there are, maybe you have a visible disability or hearing loss, and someone might ask a question about that, and it leads pretty naturally. Or maybe you're wearing a bathing suit, or you're being intimate with someone and they're noticing scars. That might be an opportunity to disclose as well. Or maybe you're just going out of town to go to the hospital out of town to be doing some of your scans. And that might be another opportunity to kind of say, well, this is the reason that I'm going out of town. I have VHL and this is what I'm going to do. I think maybe another reason too that people sometimes decided it was the right time to be sharing some of this information was being able to reciprocate some intimacy. If their partner is sharing something very personal about themselves, that is a great opening to say, or to maybe to feel comfortable sharing as well. This is something about my life. This is maybe an important piece of my identity in some cases. And it's really a great opportunity to be building some trust, growing that relationship too. I guess I feel like I have a lot to say about strategies, because I think people were just so open in sharing this with me and kind of sharing their own experiences, what has worked, and maybe in some cases what has not worked. I think tying it back to what you had said earlier about kind of using the word benign as well, or kind of figuring out the best ways to be communicating this information, but maybe not in a way that's very scary, or not in a way that's going to, unnecessarily freak a partner out, for lack of a better word. So using that word benign, maybe also talking more about some of the positive impacts VHL has had, if that's the case. Maybe self-growth, the strengths that you've gained in the trials related to VHL, or maybe being involved in the VHL community, I think is a big thing too. Overall, I don't necessarily know that it needs to feel like a big high stakes relationship in the sense that we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about VHL. I think a lot of people told me that it's not necessarily something that I'm worried about doing in one big conversation. It's something that happens more gradually. It's something that, maybe I share at first that I've experienced XYZ medical problem in the past. And maybe that's the end of the conversation for the day. And maybe later on you share a little bit more about future risks. Maybe even further on into the relationship, you're talking more about the inheritance of VHL and the fact that can impact children, be passed on to kids. Maybe how that shapes your own view of your decisions when you think about family planning. I think that it can be more of a gradual process, I guess, rather than all at once, like in one big, serious, scary conversation. If that makes sense.
Definitely. Those are great, suggestions and strategies. And I read some of the participants talking about that. And I read one responder who said that it kind of built a lot of trust, like you were mentioning, in their relationship. And so I feel like while reading this paper, I went through a roller coaster of emotions. And then when I read that participant's words, I felt like there's a way to do it in a way that actually makes your relationship with that person even stronger. And so
Yeah.
it really like was heartwarming, and I loved that part of the project.
And I think what came up too is that, you know, this might be in some cases something that scares someone off.
Mm-hmm.
Participants did share that type of experience, but I don't necessarily know if that's a bad thing. Not my own words, I guess really your other participants' words, that sometimes people used this disclosure, this information as a way to vet partners, to figure out, like, if I'm sharing this with you, are you going to be responding appropriately? Are you going to be responding with support? Are you going to be able to support me going forward? You know, you don't want to be in a relationship with someone who's not supporting you, or you feel like you can't share this information with, or, you know, you share it and you know, you deserve love. I think was a big takeaway, that this shouldn't have to be a barrier to that. And I think a lot of participants kind of shared this journey of realizing over time, I do deserve this, you know, regardless of this diagnosis. That's not something that should prevent me from being in a relationship. That's not something that should, you know, I guess kind of going back to the baggage in air quotes, it's not something that has to be. And so if a partner can't handle that, you know, move on to the next person. So, of course, again, everyone handles these conversations differently, but it was a pretty common sentiment that in some cases, maybe my strategy is to talk about this early on so that I'm not investing too much energy if this isn't going to be the right person for me.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. And it's a great way, like you said, to vet people or weed someone out. And so I appreciated reading that stuff too in the paper. And I know people or a participant mentioned that their experience or their viewpoint on dating with VHL has changed throughout different points in their life. And I know this project in particular focused on people from the age of like 20 to 35. Do you think that there could be future research that focused on middle-aged people or people in later stages of their life? And how do you think you would conceptualize that type of project?
Yeah. This project definitely focused specifically on young adults.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mention it yet, but the individuals that I spoke with were between the ages of 21 to 35, I believe it was. But I mean, I will say they were all kind of in different stages of dating, whether they were kind of, you know, single, still in the dating pool, married, kind of had different experiences. So yeah, just like you said, I think some participants were able to take more of a broad kind of retrospective look at their experiences, just to say that this is not a static thing. You know, it's not like, oh, great, like I've figured out how to do this. That it's great. Like I've conquered this challenge. There's no more work to be done. I think people had found that VHL and how that's impacting their lives is really changing throughout the whole lifespan, or even within a relationship. Maybe you've been really confident in your communication with your partner, and really successful, but then maybe a new health challenge changes the dynamic a little bit. There's just always work to be done, always new things to learn and new challenges to navigate, I think. So I think it definitely could be kind of cool to see future research take this a little bit further, just to even see at other life stages what resources are needed, and really just to encourage people to be, you know, seeking support throughout their lives. You know, things are not static. Things are not one and done as far as talking to partners and just navigating VHL as it impacts your life.
Yeah, I think it would be great to learn more about, you know, later stages and what VHL is like when you're considering having a family, or, you know, having more people possibly involved with knowing of your diagnosis. So it's definitely a point to research. And I think that your project really stimulated this psychosocial research in regards to VHL. And I know we've just talked about later stages and studying people late in life, but are there any other avenues psychosocially that could be studied with VHL?
Yeah. I think this is definitely a big topic, kind of just adapting to a diagnosis in young adulthood. It has so many facets beyond just dating. There's actually been a little bit more research with some of my colleagues at the University of Michigan that's kind of building off of this project to look a little bit more broadly at emerging adulthood and how VHL impacts emerging adulthood. So that's really exciting. I'm really excited to see the outcome of that. But I think there could definitely be a lot more research about the young adult population. I think it was expressed to me a couple of times by some individuals I spoke with that just young adults have very unique needs. And I think that there need to be very targeted resources for that particular population because of how distinct that life stage is from other life stages. So I would love to see more psychosocial research in this area and kind of pushing towards development of specific resources or, anything that's going to guide healthcare providers and patient support organizations in best serving this population.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think that even reading your paper from me, who's going to be a genetic counselor, and in your shoes in the future, it definitely made me reconsider how I want to talk to young adults who are my patients about the unique challenges they may face with a disease. So it's definitely a great point of research. And I really hope that more research is done on rare diseases like VHL.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a lot of great resources that already exist. But I think it's wonderful, like you just said, like that is really my goal in a lot of this research is to inspire healthcare providers and other people to really have this at the forefront of their minds. I know it's changed how I practice clinically, which like I'm so excited about that. That's awesome. I think I would encourage people to be asking their healthcare providers about these sorts of topics if their providers are not bringing them up themselves, because unfortunately, I think it still is the case that this isn't something that's talked about enough, not even specifically dating, but just kind of how a diagnosis of VHL or a similar condition is kind of impacting your life in different stages of your life, whether that's as an adolescent, young teen, through to young adulthood, and really asking for those resources. I think genetic counselors are great kind of central providers who kind of bridge that gap between medical genetic knowledge and kind of that more emotional psychosocial, but also asking for more long-term resources, whether that's, some kind of therapist, maybe someone who has experience in chronic disease. I think that's one thing that people I talk to really hit home is like, I navigated so much of this by myself, and no one has ever talked to me about this. Maybe later on, I figured out like, it would be great if I could have a therapist who knows, who's experienced in this way. And that really helped me. And why did I not have that before? Why was this not offered to me? Like there's a lot of anger that was not offered, and it's not okay. So I think definitely we as healthcare providers need to be very mindful of that. And anyone out there listening, as a patient interacting with these providers, really hold them accountable and be advocating for what you need, asking for what you need, even though that's not really your burden or your responsibility. Or kind of exploring things yourself too, to be thinking about how can I engage with peers, because that was also something that was cited as really, really helpful to be talking to other individuals, other young adults with VHL who have navigated similar challenges. So all things to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah, so many things to keep in mind. So many things are running through my head right now as a future provider. And so I hope that in listening to this interview and to this podcast, whether you're a patient or a provider or a caretaker or an advocate, something we've talked about can impact you and the way that you move forward when you interact with people with VHL. So that's all the questions I have for you today, Elysa. Thank you so much for sharing some of your knowledge with us and for telling us more about your thesis project. Are there any last minute things you wanted to mention before we hop off?
No, I don't think so. Other than, again, just to really reiterate, thank you so much to all of the individuals who were very vulnerable in talking to me and sharing their stories and really making this work possible. I will say too, I believe that the VHL Alliance is making available the copy of the full paper itself, and my contact information is in there too. So I really want that to be readily accessible, and if anyone has any further questions, I'm always happy to chat. So.
Awesome. Yeah, so thank you so much. And I hope you have a good day, Elysa. And thanks everyone for listening. Bye.
Thanks.